Everyone. While everybody is joining, we'll take just a minute or two, but thank you for joining us on this Halloween Eve. We're very excited to have a little bit of a Halloween themed talk here today, but we do have some logistical and housekeeping things to get to before we get started. So we'll just let everybody get in here, but I am going to cover a couple things right now. So hi, I am Amy Rowe. I am a county agent for Rutgers Cooperative Extension in Essex and Passaic counties up north, but we're very excited to have our I think this is our fourth webinar in our series, The Winds of Change, Environmental Impacts from an Altered Climate. So thank you again for joining us. Jean, go ahead with the next slide, please. So at the end of this presentation, I'm going to launch a poll to find out what you thought about the content, as well as what you learned, as well as a couple of other things, what you plan on doing in terms of actions that you learned from this talk. And all of this is considered human research because we are asking you as humans, what your opinions are, what you learned, and all of those things. And so in order for you to participate, we need your consent. So the first question on that poll will be, do you consent to this study? This is an anonymous poll. You don't need to put any information in there. It's just some questions. But if you do not want to participate, then please say no. But if you have any questions about this, please contact me. My information is right there about your rights and all of those things. We want to make sure that we have your permission to do this study with you. So we appreciate that. Please say yes if you feel comfortable. We would like to get your feedback. So thank you for that. Go ahead, Jean. So another important part of Rutgers Cooperative Extension and Rutgers University is that we are an equal opportunity provider of programming as well as an employer. So we provide these programs without discrimination. We are making sure that we provide these programs in an open and inclusive manner. If you have any questions about how we are presenting things, or how if we may be inadvertently excluding people, please let us know. But we do follow the federal guidelines for civil rights and all of their policies. So if you have any questions, here are some websites for you, and you can also email. But to be clear, Rutgers is an equal opportunity program provider as well as employer. So we want to be sure we're following those policies. So go ahead, Jean. So I'm very excited to get to this talk, but in a second, I just need to direct you to our chat box. If you have questions for our speaker, we're going to be using the chat. The chat will be going only to hosts and co-hosts. Please direct your questions to me, Amy, and I will get to those towards the end of the talk. Jean will have some time to answer some questions. So please use chat if you have any questions or comments, and we will hope to get to as many of those as possible. So please, please put those in the chat and we will do our best, but Jean will be available via email and other methods of communication if you have more questions. But also, I forgot to say that this is a program of Earth Day Every Day, which is in Rutgers Cooperative Extension's Agriculture and Natural Resources Department, as well as the Marine Extension Program Seminar Series partnership. And so we're very excited to present tonight's speaker. So Jean Epiphan is part of our Earth Day Everyday team, as well as a county agent in agriculture and natural resources in Morris County. And her background is in forestry. She is a certified arborist. She is a licensed tree expert. She is an expert in invasive and native species. She is a phenomenal field identification person for plants and all kinds of things out there. She has specialty work in beech leaf disease, as well as all kinds of other things. She also serves the landscaping industry, so we're so lucky to have her. And as you can see, her talk tonight is a little bit of a Halloween theme, so trees of the living dead and how to remove aggressively sprouting invasives. So please welcome Jean and take it away.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was such a nice intro. So yes, I have a Halloween theme. So this is a little new for me, but I tried to dress up my slides, and this is actually invasives are a scary subject. So um, we have a lot to learn, but we will have time for questions, and I'm excited about that. Because it is important to help you all out in the audience to make sure you understand everything. So we're going to talk first about some bigger picture items. So I just want to be clear and make sure that we understand what invasive species really are. Invasive species are non-native to the ecosystem that is under consideration. So not all non-natives are invasive, but in order to be invasive, they do have to first be non-native. They also have to cause harm, whether it's economic harm, environmental harm, or harm to human health in order to be considered invasive. Invasive is a specific uh, uh, title given to species that are invasive. It's not used in science and in ecological sciences as an adjective because then it would be incorrect. So therefore, and I'm going to repeat this a couple times, native species are not invasive. Native invasive is not a thing because you're describing the native as an adjective of being invasive. So if you're saying a native is taken over a little bit, it's aggressive. So that's the terminology we use. So invasive species are inherently non-native and they cause harm. What types of harm do they cause? Well, here's a few big examples where in the United States, invasives have led to the decline of 42% of our threatened and endangered species in the United States. It cost over, $1 billion a year in damages and control. And just in New Jersey and only in agricultural lands, it's estimated that we're spending over $3 million per year. And that estimation was made over 10 years ago. So just think of today how much that's costing us. But invasives are one of the greatest threats to biodiversity worldwide. Now, invasives occur in every ecosystem. Today, we're going to be zeroing in on plants and specifically aggressively sprouting tree species in New Jersey, but I'm talking about invasives of all different types. So invasive plants, invasive animals, invasive insects, invasive bacteria, fungi, diseases, etc. So just to understand why it's important that invasives, to understand the biodiversity crisis, which is the real horror show, and where invasives fall into it. Invasives are one of the top 5 causes of the biodiversity crisis. The other aspects of the biodiversity crisis are also kind of involved with invasives because it's a bit of a catch-22. For instance, habitat loss. We could have lost habitat due to development, but those areas are so disturbed in terms of their soil that they facilitate even more invasion. So invasive species go into those destroyed environments. The destruction caused by pollution, for example, terrestrial pollution. It polluted soils are not good at allowing our native forests and species, our vegetation to proliferate and thrive. Therefore, invasive species take hold there also. And climate change is facilitating the spread of many invasive species. A few examples, one is English ivy, that is now not just reproducing clonally by spreading, it's actually producing seed and germinating in new areas because of our warmer climate. So it's invasive species are a big problem for our biodiversity. Now, why is it important to have biodiversity? What does it matter? What we're people, so what if everything else dies? Well, if you're not one of the folks like me or our other Earth Day Everyday series folks that has some altruism in them, that they believe all species should be promoted to survive and that are native, and we want to take care of them so we have intact ecosystem just for the value of life, they also provide ecosystem services that are critical for life. They're critical for our life. And combined, all of the support, provisioning, and regulating of, for instance, climate are very important. For example, our intact, healthy forests store the most carbon. So there are many, many ways where that having a lowered biodiversity or the biodiversity actually indirectly and directly threatens human health. So what are the solutions to this? Well, we're actually going to talk about some today. So we can, these 5 solutions are very important. But we're going to focus on, of course, education. I am here to educate you about a way that we can help to reduce the issues that are caused by invasive species to promote native biodiversity. We're also going to be, here we go, preventing invasive species. And then by preventing them properly, using herbicides properly and safely, we can reduce pollution. And we're going to talk also about what do we do after we get rid of the invasives? Afforestation. So we get, 4 out of the 5 solutions to for helping biodiversity. All right, now let's get back to the education part. So, invasive plant traits. Now, we went over this in depth. Invasive plants are non-native inherently. They are also habitat generalists, and that means that they can thrive in multiple types of landscapes. They don't just have a niche environment. They can do well in many sorts. They also don't have many consumers, or they have no consumers or diseases that keep their populations in check, because so they can spread and they easily multiply by seeds, runners, or rhizomes. And of course, I just said this, they spread and they spread so much that they displace desirable or native species. Now, this kind of sounds like The Blob. You all remember this movie from a little while ago. The Blob is indescribable, indestructible, and nothing can stop it. But guess what? We're going to learn today the difference with invasive plants. Invasive plants are describable. We're going to learn how to identify them. They are destructible. We're going to learn the proper way to remove these aggressively sprouting invasive trees, and we can stop them if we do this correctly. So, invasive plant management in general takes an integrative approach. The best approach is early detection, rapid response, but a lot of times we're too late coming in and we have to use other methods. Manual methods can sometimes work, just pulling a species out. Usually it doesn't, because they are more tenacious and you don't get the whole plant or the roots out. Mechanical mowing or land moving can be part of the equation, but usually when you have a big invasion, you do need to use chemicals to properly remove the species. Now, they can be managed manually and managed mechanically, but you will have fewer species and you can actually get closer to eradication when you mix in the proper herbicides, but they have to be used. You have to do it safely. The timing is very important. You have to make sure you're using the right products and the correct application methods. But what's really comes first before all of this is knowing your plant ID, because you want to know which species are your targets and what do they look like. So here I have a few references for you all. So for those of you that like QR codes, here are a few to each one of these links that are listed above. I do want to share with you that New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection has lists available of invasive plants. Some of the lists are a little confusing. And they also state, for some reason, that they do not have an official state list. I'm not sure why, but they do reference other sources. So the second source in the green box is an older invasive species list made in 2004. It does need some updating, but it does have some very good resources in it. The list at the bottom, created by the New Jersey strike team, they made a do not plant list. And it's a very comprehensive list that is referenced by the NJDEP. So this is a source that they're recommending for the public to use to know what is invasive in New Jersey. Now we're going to be focusing on trees, invasive trees with zombie traits. Now, what are zombie traits? Now, of course, I'm trying to follow my Halloween theme here with the zombie traits, but these are traits where they keep sprouting, right? Even after you cut them down, they sprout back to life and they keep sprouting and sprouting. So the list on the right is a pretty full list. It might not have all of our invasive species that sprout from the stump, especially after you cut them, but it is a good list, and these are somewhat aggressive in the way that they sprout. But the worst three species that actually sprout pretty aggressively, even when they're not cut, are tree of heaven, angelica tree, and black locust. And we're going to dive into these three trees today. Now, I want to explain. When a tree first, one of these three invasive species, the most aggressive zombie trees we have in the state, they come into an environment and then they grow and grow and grow. And once they reach a certain level of maturity, they start sending up clonal sprouts. And these clonal sprouts start to dominate an area, right? And so when they make this clonal growth, that's how they start to push out other species. So that's called asexual reproduction. They also make seeds and they spread to new places, sexual reproduction. But what makes it especially aggressive is that even before they get to the point of making a clonal growth, you cut down a single stem of one of these trees, they will shoot up a clonal mass in its place. And that's why it needs to be treated before the species get cut down. Now, let's dive into each species one by one, and then about how to identify them, where they come from, and also, or after that, we're going to talk about the actual step-by-step methodology for removal. All right, black locust, Robinia pseudoacacia. Black locust is a species that is native to parts of the United States. You can see here the dark green on the left is its native range, but it's been spreading throughout the United States because humans have been moving it around and planting it since colonial times. It's been shipped to Europe in the 1600s. I mean, this tree is all over the place. The history of it in New Jersey is that it was planted in agricultural lands. It was used as hedgerows. It has rot-resistant timber, so when the trees got old, it was useful wood. So it's basically been planted and then it reproduces and it has stayed. Now, this species, some folks, even high up folks in state departments, they call this species a native, but it is outside of its natural range, and it is not native to the ecosystems, the actual plant communities that exist in New Jersey. It is not from these forest types. It does not occur in them. So, and I just want to make that really, really clear. Now, Black locust, where does it invade? Typically areas that have at least part sun, but they really prefer full sun sites, disturbed soils, post-agricultural land, canopy gaps in forest, forest edges, and roadsides, of course. So what does it look like? Well, check out those saplings on the left, those demonic spines it has. They come in pairs. Now, when it's a seedling growing into a sapling, it has these paired spines up and down the stems. They create thickets when there's many sprouts that are very thorny. When they're older, they lack spines. You can see the matured bark at the bottom. It's gray, it has interlacing ridges, and then in between the ridges, there's furrows that sometimes have an orange to yellowy tinge to them. Now, the leaves. The leaves of black locust are compound. Actually, our 3 trees in question today are have compound leaves. This means that they have a leaf that's actually divided into multiple leaflets. So the leaflets on black locust are very round. They're an oval shape, but they're rounded. They don't have a pointed tip. And then you can see the seed pods. The seed pods look like pea pods. And that's because black locust is in the pea family, the Fabaceae family. So you'll be able to pick this out in the landscape by the type of pods it has as well. Here's some black locust seedlings and a germinant all the way up in the left corner. This germinant still has its cotyledons. I don't know if y'all remember from like middle school botany what a cotyledon is, but it's the first actual leafy tissue that comes out first, and it doesn't look like the second set of leaves with which are the true leaves. So you can see the true leaves are starting to unfurl. That's in the spring. And then the photo in the top center is about a month later when I yoinked it out. And I took this out and you can see, look at those leaves. They're like oval shaped with a rounded edge. They lack points. And check out the picture below in the grass. Look at that runner that has such a long root. So these black locusts have a lot of superficial roots, and the root system is very pervasive. It spreads outward and shoots up the suckers or the sprouts. And then you can see here a winter picture of a small growing clonal stand that's covered in spines. So next up is our how do we ID the Angelica tree, Aurelia alata? Well, first we want to know where it is. So it comes from Asia, primarily China, parts of Eastern Siberia, but in the United States, it's very New Jersey is where it is heavily invaded. So this picture shows the states in dark blue where the species has been introduced, and the highlights of the lighter teal color are the counties where there is verification that it's there. So it's throughout New Jersey. Angelica tree, Aurelia alata, invades disturbed soils, canopy gaps in forest, forest edges, and roadsides. And let's look at its traits. Angelica tree is bipinnately compound. So I just mentioned we have compound trees, but bipinnately compound is even more divided. So it almost looks like this leaf, which is outlined in that red bracket, that's the actual size of the one leaf. It has many, many leaflets, and it looks like there's branches and stems. So those stems of that leaf are actually called rachis. And this is bipinnately compound, so the rachis has rachises, and there's many leaflets. And those leaflets have little serrations, but importantly, those rachises are covered in spines. Now on the right, you could see a large cluster of flowers. So the flowers, they first come out white in the summer, and then they start to turn pink as the flowers kind of fall apart. The formation of the inflorescence gets a pinkish tone, and then berries form. Those berries are eaten by different birds and then they disperse them to other canopy gaps in the forest. But just the same as black locust, it does have a pervasive root system. So it effectively clonally sprouts, but it also spreads by seed and is dispersed. When it's dispersed into new areas, that's when you do your early detection rapid response, and that's when you find the seedling. I found this seedling in the forest, snapped some shots. You can see the arrows are pointing at different features on the leaves, the leaflets. The leaflets are serrated. They have a little bit of hairy fuzz at the top when they're young. And there's also these thin spines that you can see throughout the rachis. Also, it's important when you are actually pulling manually a little seedling, make sure you get the root. When you have dry soil like we have right now, we haven't had rain in over a month, actual significant rain. It's very hard to pull anything out manually and get the root. The soil needs to be moist to wet. Oh my goodness, check out these spines. So, Angelica tree is covered in spines up and down the trunk, especially when it's in this sapling stage. And there's many saplings are covered with many spines. The our Angelica tree, Aurelia alata, is related to Aurelia spinosa. Aurelia spinosa is called appropriately devil's walking stick. Now, this species comes from Texas. About 20 years ago, when we were starting to really notice the invasion of Angelica tree, our biologists and botanists first thought it was the Texas native, devil's walking stick. So you might see around that people noted that we have devil's walking stick in New Jersey. It's not devil's walking stick from Texas, it's Angelica tree. But Angelica tree is not the greatest name for this tree. It really should be called demonic tree. And if you want to learn a little bit more about this species, Michelle Bacchus and I wrote an Invasive Species of the Month article, and you can QR code that with your phone, or I said that backwards, you can snap it with your phone, so the QR code, and I'll give you a few more seconds for that, and then we'll move on to our third tree. All right, Tree of Heaven, Ailanthus altissima. It is originated from China and it has spread throughout the temperate and even colder boreal environments of the globe. In the United States, most of the lower 48 have been invaded. The dark blue shows the states that have been invaded. The teal color means introduced, and pink, it means it also was introduced, but those are the states that actually went through and officially labeled it a noxious species. So it is noxious everywhere. It just depends on whether your state wants to officially list it or not. So, Tree of Heaven. This species has been in the United States for over 100 years, and it invades everywhere. It invades disturbed soils, canopy gaps in forests, forest edges, roadsides, urban lots, landfills, cracks in cement, the worst of the worst places. You will find this growing where you don't think any plant can grow. This will grow. Now, it is a fast-growing invasive species. It tolerates a range of conditions, and it's allelopathic. What does that mean? Allelopathy is when a plant exudes a compound that inhibits the growth of certain other species of plants. Now, we've learned that trees that are allelopathic, the ones that they impact are not the species that have co-evolved with them. They're not species from their plant community. Therefore, an invasive species that's non-native and allelopathic has a high potential to affect our native species or some of our ornamental plants that have not co-evolved with Tree of Heaven. We know that allelopathy is very strong to oak species, the allelopathy that comes from Tree of Heaven. So in essence, this tree of heaven being in our ecosystems degrades our ecosystems. Another aspect that folks don't really like about this tree is that it's weak wooded. It easily breaks. And you often find a tree like this growing next to a parking lot. So that's not a good scenario. It aggressively sprouts, as we mentioned, and it has a pervasive root system like the other trees we mentioned. You can see this was a Facebook post from an invasive plant group where someone actually had the ability to pull out all of those roots intact from just that small seed, that small sapling right there in that picture. Another aspect to this tree is it's not aesthetically ideal. In New Jersey, there is a certain ornamental aesthetic that people expect from our trees, and it's not one that folks normally like. We can go on and on about that, but we're not going to do that here. And last of all, oh my goodness, it is the host tree for spotted lanternfly, an invasive insect. So this really is not the tree of heaven. This is the tree of heck. So how do we identify this tree? And we're going to talk about this in the next few slides. The leaves are compound, so there are many leaflets per leaf. The leaflets are not serrated, like a lot of species that you can confuse this with. It has a wavy leaf edge or leaf margin, and there is a little notch at the base of the leaf with a little, maybe sometimes a little lobe. You can see where those arrows are pointing to in that central photo. The twigs are stout, and they have dotted lenticels, large leaf scars. That's where the leaf attaches with the petiole to the twigs. The bark is smooth and it has wavy serrations. We'll see some photos of the flower and the fruit on the next slide. The branching is very open. It has a very open canopy, and it has a distinct smell. It's a pungent odor when it's broken. So if you break a twig or the leaves, it's very stinky. Some people describe this as burnt peanut butter. I've never, not burnt peanut butter, rotten peanut butter. I've never smelled rotten peanut butter before, but I would imagine if it did go rotten, it would smell like this. So the fruit it looks like a bright like salmon or coral pink, salmony orange color. And but it starts off like a yellowy color, and once it matures, it gets pinkish. The flowers before that, around midsummer or August, are this light yellowy color. In spring, the leaves can be reddish when they're emerging, but they will quickly emerge and look like the photos on the right, with many leaflets per leaf. And you can see the abundant clonal sprouts over in the corner underneath those power lines. Why do we think we have so many sprouts? Because they keep cutting those trees to keep them away from the power lines, and they're not using herbicide. So when we cut trees without using herbicide, we get these little sprouts. These sprouts grow quickly. So these are sprouts in springtime. The first true leaves that appear, they appear lobed and they lack serrations, like I mentioned before. And then when the lobes actually morph and as the leaves develop, they become divided and compound and they develop their separate leaflets. They also develop their little basal notch, and they have their odor already at this time. And I wanted to show you these pictures because look at that picture on the right. It's growing out of a crack between concrete. It's a pretty tough plant. Now, this is a bird's eye view of it, and it has when the leaves are first coming out a little bit later in the season, in the center, they can look glossy and a little bit reddish to brownish tinged. And check these guys out. These aren't clonal sprouts. These are germinants. These germinated from a seed, right? So back to middle school botany, the cotyledons that first are revealed before the true leaves come out, these are very round, they're thick. And then the first true leaves you can see here are emerging. And we have that that long central leaf, and then the the long central part of the leaf, and then the two little sides, right? It looks like two little lobes on the sides. Well, those to me look like a devil's pitchfork because it's a devilish plant. And it is really, even when it's a baby, it's still the tree of heck. So I wanted to show this for comparison because I kept saying that tree of heaven lacks serrations. One of the trees that is most commonly confused with tree of heaven is black walnut. Black walnut is one of our native species that has serrated leaflets. And when you crush it, if you crush the leaf, break the leaf, or break a twig, it smells citrusy or maybe even like pine sol-ish, but very different from rotten peanut butter. And I do also want to mention, we get a lot of questions about allelopathy. Black walnut also has allelopathy, but black walnut does not impact native species that have co-evolved with it in the same plant communities. The allelopathy that black walnut has impacts a specific non-native species, some ornamental non-natives as well. So now we get to the nitty-gritty here. Regular felling of these three aggressively sprouting trees does not cut the mustard. It creates a grove of clonal sprouts. Stump grinding post felling still does not stop the sprouting. When a tree service does a stump grind, they're probably doing like a 6-foot diameter area at maximum. These root systems go far beyond 30-foot radius from the mother tree. So we are not getting the whole root system when we get a stump grind. Now, even if you use an herbicide on the stump after it's felled, that still will not be a fast enough herbicide response to stop the sprouts. It may impact them slightly, but you will still have aggressive sprouting and your clonal growth will still quickly grow and not be hindered. Now, I was inspired to create this talk because I lived this problem. 2 houses away from me, there was a large tree, a tree of heaven, that I kept asking my neighbors to take it down. I kept warning that it was weak-wooded, warning it would attract spotted lanternfly, and they didn't take it down. We had spotted lanternflies throughout our neighborhood because of this tree, and it didn't have any sprouts yet. I told them how to take it down, but did their arborist listen? No. They cut it down and they stump grind it. We had hundreds of sprouts in our neighborhood and spotted lanternfly everywhere. Here's an example of the sprouts that were we had to treat the sprouts afterwards, and they were still so aggressive that they were still living. And who's on these sprouts? Even if they've been treated? Spotted lanternfly. They love the tree of the living dead, our tree of heck, or tree of heaven, whatever you want to call it. It's detrimental to our environment and it attracts the invasive spotted lanternfly. Now, let's talk about how to properly treat so we can remove these from our landscapes. I have this other QR code up because it will take you to a plant and pest advisory authored by Steve Retke from Rutgers, and it is Tree of Heaven, Best Herbicide Treatment and Removal Timing. The majority of this information comes straight from this plant and pest advisory. Now, the targeted treatment timing. I didn't get a chance to alter and extend the date a little bit because our falls are lasting longer. So I would suggest the targeted treatment timing could be up to mid-November because that's when we will see these days a hard frost. We don't really see a hard frost in New Jersey in mid-October anymore, or even early November. So, but the best treatment timing is late summer through early fall regardless. you would want to time this treatment. We're going to talk about all the steps of it, but we're going to talk about the timing here. That at the second half of the growing season, when the tree is less focused on outward growth. In the spring and early summer, they're focused on outward growth. So also, we may need 2 treatments during this time frame, and they should be spaced about 1 to 2 months apart. For example, you can do early August and then again in September. You could do September and then again in October. So once the trees have actually been treated, that's when a tree service can come in and fell the tree. And this should be at least 1 month after the last treatment. You can do this in late fall, winter, or the next growing season, depending on the threat that the tree has to the landscape. The best case scenario is if there are no targets around and it's not dangerous to leave a potentially standing dead tree, it's good to check to see if the tree is sprouting the next spring, because you may actually need to treat it one more time, again, at the second half of the growing season. These are tenacious trees, especially Tree of Heaven out of the 3 is the most tenacious. And you also, once you do fell the tree, you want to follow up for 2 years and spot treat any few suckers that still might come up. Now you might ask, that's a lot of work. Why are we going to pre-treat if we still have to post-treat? Well, if you don't pre-treat, you're going to be post-treating for 5 or 10 years, and you're going to be using a lot more herbicide in the environment, and the goal is to use the least amount of herbicide needed. So we're going to go over some treatment options for homeowners that don't have a pesticide license next, but I do want to talk about what you would use if you have a pesticide license or you're a practitioner, or if you hire a practitioner. It's good to know what choices they have and what they will use. So there are 3 different options for how to treat these aggressively sprouting trees. And it depends on the size. That's your best strategy, depends on the size. So if you would use a foliar method of application for small trees, seedlings, anything under 8 feet, maybe even under 6 feet, because 8 feet is still above your head and spraying something foliar can be dangerous the higher it is. So for saplings that are smaller than 6 inches diameter, around chest height, you would use a basal bark treatment, or a practitioner would use a basal bark treatment. This basal bark treatment is applied to the lower part of the stem, the sweet spot, 12 to 18 inches above the ground. And this would be done with a hand can or a backpack sprayer. Hack and squirt is a method that is employed for larger trees where you actually have to hack into the tree. I'll show photos of all of this. You'll see it all. You actually have to hack into the tree, and then you spray at the cuts. And you have to make spaced cuts at the sweet spot, right? About a foot, 1.5 feet above the ground. And you leave an inch or 2 of space between each cut that's pointed downward. So what types of herbicides are used? And you can see here for each method, we have the examples of good herbicides to use. Good meaning appropriate herbicides. So for basal bark treatment, that's the one that uses triclopyr ester. That's applied without any incision, and it is absorbed through the bark. But for the other methods, the foliar method or the hack and squirt, you can use glyphosate, which is sold as Aquaneat, or triclopyramine, sold as Garlon 3A. Now, it is important to note that you want to make sure that your method is not hitting any non-target foliage or vegetation in the area. And you have to make sure that you're following the label. The label is the law. When you're a homeowner and you're buying an herbicide and you got to read that fine print, pull open that instruction booklet, because still for you, You need to read the label because the label is the law. It also keeps you safe. So for any of these methods, a homeowner can go into a store and purchase an herbicide that's labeled brush killer. You can also get it online. There's some examples listed here. The tough brush killers are what is used for the greatest success for the most tenacious types of invasive plants we have. Now, the difference in application that I added here is when you have a sapling, you may not be able to use the basal bark method because you might not have the triclopyr ester as one of the active ingredients. So you might have to do a different method where it's really similar or the same as hack and squirt. You just have to be careful when you hack something small because you don't want to cut it down because then you're going to have sprouts come up. You just need to damage this stem so you can actually scratch and squirt also. You can use a hand pruner and just scratch. All right. These are examples of good foliar candidates. When they're too tall, it can be dangerous. You have more herbicide in the air, you can have drift. But when they're smaller, usually I would say for my own being cautious, I like below 5 feet, but in the literature it says 8 to 10 feet. Now, this is what basal bark treatments look like. This is what you would do for saplings. The black is a dye, and it's applied here with a pump sprayer. The pump sprayers are very targeted. You can before you spray anything, you can adjust the settings so it's a very narrow spray and you're not hitting anything else. Hack and squirt method, you can use a spray can or a backpack sprayer. You do this for mature trees, and as you can see, the cuts are angled downward because then when you spray the herbicide, you want it to get inside the tissue of the tree. When you do it on a sapling, make sure you're doing it more carefully so you don't cut it down. And again, I suggest the scraping method. Now, if you're a practitioner and you're doing this a lot, or you plan to be doing this a lot, you can get this nifty apparatus called an EasyJect. You can also, I think you might be able to get this even if you're not a practitioner, but it is an investment. The EasyJet costs maybe $700, $800. So it's not really something a homeowner would need. And this is a way that you can apply the herbicide to saplings and larger trees with an injection. You inject these cartridges that are filled already pre-mixed with the herbicide, and you just inject it right in the tree. You have no exposure to herbicide, you have no spray exposure, there's no mixing, there's no added hazard for the applicator. It's lightweight, you can do it whether it's windy or not, and it works in any weather. So this is really useful for folks or land managers that have a lot of invasive sprouting trees that they need to take care of. It's a very good investment. Now, a nifty option for homeowners, if you're using the scratch and spray method I was talking about, which is kind of like an adaptation of the hack and squirt method, here with this product called the buckthorn blaster, it's actually like a squeeze bottle with a spongy tip, kind of like almost like a glue stick. If you scratch, instead of spraying, you can just paint it on with a little squeeze pressure with your hand, and it's even safer than spraying. This is available online. Just Google Buckthorn Blaster, and you can get your hands on that for very inexpensive. It can help you with a lot of situations, and it's also used for when you're cutting down shrubs and treating them, invasive shrubs, and other woody plants, woody vines. So now we're going to move on to, so here are replacement species. This is our afforestation part. So if you want to replace your trees, your tree canopy, after you remove tree of heaven or angelica tree or our black locust, I listed here for you the trees that can take the most degraded sites, especially because of tree of heaven allelopathy. So I didn't list oaks for that reason. These are all native species that are important for biodiversity in our environment, and they do well in places that commonly get invaded with tree of heaven, angelica tree, and black locust. Now, I did want to follow up, and I'm not going to take on the full topic of invasive insects. I know George Hamilton is one of the speakers coming up, but I did want to mention we said that tree of heaven attracts spotted lanternfly, and that's because spotted lanternfly needs tree of heaven to thrive and successfully reproduce. Tree of heaven is the preferred host plant of spotted lanternfly. Now, the spotted lanternfly range map as of last year is on the left, and we can see it spreading, throughout the Northeast. It's kind of getting a little into the Midwest, down into the Carolinas, and it's facilitated by humans. But it's also spreads because the host tree is in these areas. You can see, if you know where cities are on these maps, you can probably notice that the cities in the most urban areas that have the disturbance, that have tree of heaven, are the places that are most likely to get their spotted lanternfly invasions. So on the right, we have our potential distribution of spotted lanternfly in the United States once it fully spreads out. And this mirrors closely the range of where our tree of heaven has spread in the United States. Now, not all of the areas where tree of heaven can do well and are doing well in spreading are where spotted lanternfly can occur, and that's because spotted lanternfly does have a little more climate and elevation limitations than tree of heaven. So that's why we're not seeing the spotted lanternfly predicted spread really far into the Rocky Mountains or into our very arid climates like in Arizona and New Mexico. But the reason I explain this is because we really need to stop thinking about how controlling invasives by treating the insect. We should be treating the host plant. So instead of attacking the insect with a pesticide that is worse for our environment than an herbicide, or instead of going after and trying to scratch off eggs, when of course we are not going to find them all, let's attack its happy place, the preferred host, the zombie tree, our tree of heaven, right? Or tree of heck. So we're going to be setting up the poll now.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to launch that. Please fill this out while Jean finishes her talk. And hopefully you'll see it pop up. And we'll just leave that up for a little while. So go ahead, Jean.
Yeah. And so I think everybody has the ability to move the poll over. So if you want to, I can put to the next screen. I did list out some resources if you want to screenshot. These resources are just good go-to places for if you want to reach me. For instance, you would call the Morris County Extension, that's on the third line, but the NJDEP invasive species homepage, that's where you would find the invasive plant page that I shared with you earlier. The invasive species strike team has loads of information about plants and how to eradicate each specific plant species. If you need help, you would call your county office. If you're in Morris County, you can call the Morris County Extension and we can chat about your specific issue. And we have a Rutgers Invasive Species of the Month that I wanted to share. More species are coming soon, but we did already, which is spearheaded by Michelle Bacchus, and together we have written 5 already, and there's more to come. So, I am,
Ready to take questions?
yeah, I wanted to jump to my last slide, because we're giving you kind of 2 homeworks at once. You to finish the poll. And then please, before I take questions, I'm a tenure track professor, so it's really important for me to collect positive feedback. And I would really appreciate it if you're able to scan this QR code, or we can type in that link and get to my teaching evaluation. So I really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much. All right, we've got Sharonda. She has a question.
So Sharonda, please put your question in the chat. We're not taking oral questions, please. So you chat, and then I will take some questions in the meantime here. So Jean, you ready?
Yes.
I've got a question. Is poison ivy invasive?
No. Poison ivy is a native species. We don't like it, but guess what? We're the only creature, our species is the only one that gets dermatitis from it. It actually is part of our environment, and it provides ecological resources for other species in our ecosystem. For example, birds eat the berries in wintertime because they have a lot of oils in them and they're fatty.
Right, thank you. Are herbicides water soluble? Can they be washed into the soil or other plants?
So each herbicide compound is different. Some are water soluble and some are they're used with oils. Now, the herbicides that are on the market have been deemed safe for us to use, but they need to be used properly. Now, herbicides, you don't want to be spraying the soil. You want to be spraying the plant, and they break down after they impact the plant, and there's very little impact if applied correctly into the soil. You also want to make sure to read the label, because it will talk about if it rains, how long does it take for the product to be rain fast so it's not washed out.
Thank you. So we have another question. Do we know how long after removal of the tree of heaven does the toxicity remain?
So the allelopathy, that's honestly not very well studied, so we don't really know. And that's why I do recommend to don't plant oaks in those areas for a while until other trees or other native vegetation has taken hold. Nature does heal, but we need, in these days, in our disturbed soils and our degraded environments, we need to help it along to heal. So another great way to help speed that process is to leave the leaves. The soil microbes, the more active they are, the more they process these compounds and get them processed and out of, the system more quickly. So if we leave leaves, we're actually feeding the soil life. So that will reinstate natural processes, and that would speed the process, but I don't know the duration.
So I just put the article that Jean wrote about Leave the Leaves into the chat, so please
Oh,
check
thank-
that out. Very timely. So thank you. So we've got a couple more questions. So the question that Sharonda had, you may know She is a Rutgers environmental steward. She was
Yes.
wondering, can we get some folks from environmental stewards to help to remove invasive species across the state?
We love to do that. We need a steward leader to lead the effort because us as agents, we'd love to be able to do that, but we have so many projects going on, and that seems like a perfect project for a steward leader. But
Yes,
it definitely can happen.
yes, we will be addressing that within our environmental stewards group, but thank you, Sharonda, for sure.
And
So,
also, just one note is that the New Jersey strike team, they actually have like other strike teams that they direct throughout the state. So this is kind of already happening through the strike team network.
Sharonda says she will gather some folks up.
Good.
So great,
Let's fight
thank you.
invasives. Let's kill those zombies.
Yes. Okay, so there's another question specifically about bamboo. What's the best
Mm.
way to get rid of that?
Well, honestly, the fastest way is to incorporate herbicides. And you would need a few years of application in the second half of the growing season. You probably do a foliar herbicide, but you want to cut it down so you're not spraying high up. You want to just spray down. And the herbicides listed for foliar that we listed would work, or brush killer.
Thank you. So there's another question. How do we report seeing invasive species?
That is on the strike team website. So you can report it there, and if it's not a widespread species, it's very useful. If the species is really widespread, it's really not going to help. So on their website, they actually list out which species are emerging, which species are widespread, and they even have a watch list. So the link that I showed earlier on was the do not plant list. Those are species that are already here, emerging or widespread, but there's even a watch list for invasives where they're showing invasive tendencies, but we haven't yet put them on an invasive list yet. So check those out, and those would be really important to report.
Okay, thank you. So there is a question. Do spotted lanternflies also like black walnut?
So spotted lanternfly has been described as being attracted to or being able to utilize black walnut, sumac, and then some other of our native species, but it has not co-evolved for thousands and thousands of years, living alongside our black walnut or other native species. It has evolved to utilize the compounds from Tree of Heaven. So spotted lanternfly can ravage our grapevines like they have in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, but they are not, it doesn't have, they don't have the compounds that spotted lanternfly really require to succeed long term in an environment. And Tree of Heaven carries that. It is the host plant of spotted lanternfly. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any AI apps to recommend to identify invasive plants with your phone?
So the AI apps are a bit hit or miss. So what I would suggest is there's multiple out there, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages, right? We have some drawbacks to some where they're less accurate, but they're a lot easier to use, they're faster. So it really depends on the amount of time you want to invest. The most accuracy you'll probably get is if you post on iNaturalist, and you can get an expert to verify your species. Now, if there are species that are really common that more people are posting, that's where AI is going to be more accurate, and you can use an app like Picture This, Leaf Snap. There's many different types. That just keep in mind that typical AI, or there's now like there's like a Google one too. I don't even know what that is. They are not highly accurate. I've noticed, I've tested them, I've tested out Picture This, for example. I'm getting about 80% accuracy, but I try to throw it stumpers to see. I throw out weird ones, and it doesn't get things that, some plants don't read the book and they don't always look like they're supposed to look, and that tricks the AI.
Okay, thank you. So this is a interesting question. I am already leaving my leaves, but how many are too many?
Well, it depends on which species of leaves. So I don't want to get into the weeds here, but the native leaves are a lot better for our environment than leaves from invasive trees. So that's one thing. If you feel you have too many leaves and you have exotic trees and natives, and you need to get rid of some, get rid of, your exotic ones if you can do that. Like if you have exotics in one place, if they're intermixed, that's probably not useful advice.
They say maple.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Norway maple can have that's an invasive species, and so it depends on which maple. Um Often folks complain about having too many oak leaves because they take a lot longer to break down because of the way they're much thicker. And um and maple trees actually break down rather quickly. And especially if we have invasive jumping worms, our maples or other species that have thin leaves like maples, like birch, elm, etc., they will break down very quickly if you have invasive jumping worms on the property. Oaks will last through that. They will not get eaten up so quickly by invasive jumping worms. So it really depends on your site condition. But if you think about it logically, or we're leaving the leaves because we want to reinstate a natural process. How many leaves are in the woods? Think about that. So every environment has, a certain amount of leaves that it has naturally. But if you have, for instance, an ornamental garden that you might have too many leaves in and it's not doing well, that's an artificial setting. So it's really hard to answer that question because there's so many different avenues and ways to think about how leaves can affect your landscape. It all depends on what you have planted.
Okay, I've got one more question, then we're going to wrap up. So,
Gotcha.
previously, our red maple was infested by spotted lanternfly. Since then, we rarely see any. We don't spray pesticides or chemicals. We have mostly native plants. Is this unusual?
In terms of, well, so spotted lanternfly can utilize red maple. It's on the list of the many trees that the spotted lanternfly can feed on. Um, the spotted lanternfly, and I'm imagining George Hamilton's going to touch upon this next week, but it came like a tidal wave across New Jersey from west to east. It came from Pennsylvania, where it was first introduced. And I'm saying a tidal wave because the population surged and then went down. And that happened across in a wave, where it happened first like in Mercer County in that area, and then swept across all the way to like Bergen, where I live in Bergen, and we had spotted lanternfly, high numbers last year. We're all learning about how this movement is spreading and what's happening and how our environment is adjusting, how our other species in the environment are adjusting to even becoming predators. So what's weird, I don't know. I think a lot of things are weird these days.
Thank you. So, let's all thank Jean for an amazing presentation. And if you enjoyed our free webinar, please consider donating to support our program. I've put the link in the chat. We provide these webinars without charge, but we do have costs associated with this program. So if you're feeling generous, we would appreciate it. So take a minute to do that. So thank you. So please finish the poll. Please take a look at Jean's evaluation. She needs those teaching evaluations, so please take care of that. And then I also wanted to remind everyone that we do have 2 more webinars in this series in November, so one next week and then one the following week. But unfortunately, the registration was a little confusing because it only showed the first 4 webinars of our series in the first panel, and you had to scroll down to register for the last two. So please, if you were planning on coming, but you may not have registered for those, so please take another look at that registration, and I'll put that in the chat also. But thank you so much for joining us. And again, let's thank Jean for a very informative and in-depth presentation, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.